United States Air Force spent 42 years trying to kill the A-10 Warthog. Then, in April 2026, the same Air Force that begged Congress to retire it suddenly extended it through 2030, and quietly began circulating concept studies for something defense analysts are already calling the A-11. A jet designed in the early 1970s to hunt Soviet tanks across the Fulda Gap is now strafing Iranian small boats in the Strait of Hormuz, knocking Shahed drones out of the sky with laser-guided rockets and flying close-in combat rescue against a real shooting enemy. The Pentagon spent decades arguing the Warthog was too slow, too vulnerable, too analog for modern war. So, when modern war finally arrived this year, why did they reach straight for the analog jet? And why are they now sketching its successor? The answer involves a half-century brawl between the Air Force, Congress, contractors, and the soldiers on the ground. And the full story is stranger than the headline suggests. To understand what the so-called A-11 actually represents, you have to go back to the airplane the Air Force never wanted to build in the first place. The Warthog exists because of a war the Air Force was losing on the ground. By the mid-1960s in Vietnam, fast jets like the F-4 Phantom were screaming over jungle canopies at speeds that made it nearly impossible to identify friendly troops, let alone protect them. American soldiers were dying while close air support arrived too fast, too high, and too late. The propeller-driven A-1 Sky Raider, a relic from the Korean War, kept outperforming the modern jets at the one mission that actually mattered to the infantry. That embarrassment forced the Air Force to launch the A-X program in September 1966, a competition for a dedicated closed air support aircraft built around an unusual mandate. It had to fly low, fly slow, loiter for hours, take direct hits, and absorb punishment that would shred any conventional fighter. In November 1970, the Pentagon added the specification that would define the entire airframe to come. The aircraft would be built around a 30mm rotary cannon capable of killing Soviet armor in a single pass. Two prototypes flew off in 1972. The Northrop YA-9 lost, the Fairchild Republic YA-10 won, and on January 18, 1973, the Air Force selected it for production. Service entry followed in 1977, and from the day the first Warthog joined the force, senior Air Force leadership began quietly trying to retire it. The proposed A-11 is, in many ways, the Air Force finally admitting that the airframe it never wanted is the one it cannot live without. The cannon makes up roughly 16% of the entire airframe's unladen weight, and removing it requires propping the jet's tail up with a jack to keep the airplane from tipping over backwards. That is not a design flaw. That is the design. The GAU-8 Avenger is a 7-barreled, hydraulically driven rotary cannon that fires 30mm rounds at a fixed rate of 3,900 per minute, and it produces 10,000 pounds of recoil force when it fires, slightly more than the thrust of one of the A-10's two TF-34 engines. Engineers mounted it slightly off-center to the port side, so the actively firing barrel sits on the aircraft's centerline, preventing the recoil from pushing the jet off target during a strafing run. The complete weapon system, with feed and drum, weighs over 4,000 pounds, holds roughly 1,150 rounds, and was designed to place 80% of those rounds inside a 40-foot circle at 4,000 feet of slant range. Armor-piercing rounds use a depleted uranium core capable of punching through Soviet-era tank armor at 500 meters. Around this gun, Fairchild Republic engineered an airframe that prioritizes survival over speed. The pilot sits inside a titanium tub designed to stop 23mm armor-piercing rounds. Flight controls run redundantly through both hydraulics and a manual reversion system. The twin engines are mounted high and apart, so one can be lost without taking the other down with it. The landing gear partially extends below the fuselage even when retracted, allowing belly landings without catastrophic damage. The proposed A-11 concept reportedly keeps this entire philosophy intact and adds modern sensors, networked targeting, and a digital cockpit. The bones, however, remain the same brutal bones. In 1984, the same year the final A-10 rolled off the production line, the Air Force formally asked Congress for permission to retire the entire fleet. Congress said no, and it has been saying no for over 40 years. The pattern repeated itself with surreal consistency. The Air Force argued the Warthog was too vulnerable for modern air defenses. Congress and Army ground commanders fired back that nothing else could loiter over troops in contact and put rounds on target the way the A-10 could. Senator John McCain led one revolt in 2014. Senator Mark Kelly led another in 2021. Each time the Air Force tried to send the Warthogs to the boneyard at Davis-Monthan, lawmakers added language to the National Defense Authorization Act, forcing the service to keep flying them. The fiscal 2026 NDAA went further, prohibiting the Air Force from dropping the inventory below 103 aircraft. The institutional bitterness ran deep. Air Force leaders argued that every dollar and every mechanic spent on the Warthog was a dollar and a mechanic not spent on the F-35A, the F-15EX, the B-21 Raider, or the upcoming 6th generation F-47. Reportedly, internal Pentagon discussions earlier this year revealed that the White House itself pushed back against full retirement, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth publicly wrote, "Long live the Warthog," on social media, the same day the extension was announced. The deeper controversy is what the A-10 exposes about the Air Force's institutional priorities. The service was built around speed, altitude, and air superiority. Close air support was always the mission it inherited rather than chose. Pilots from the infantry side of the war loved the Warthog precisely because it broke the Air Force's preferred way of fighting. The A-11 concept, then, is not just a new airplane on a drawing board. It is the closest the Air Force has ever come to publicly admitting that the mission it tried to discard for 40 years is one it now has to design for from scratch. On March 9, 2026, during Operation Epic Fury against Iran, an A-10 was hit by enemy fire while violently suppressing ground forces around a downed American pilot, flew itself back to friendly airspace, and the aviator ejected safely after determining the jet could not be landed. And that single incident reportedly accelerated the entire A-11 discussion inside the Pentagon. The Warthog had been written off as obsolete against a peer enemy. Then it went to war against one and survived. Air Force Secretary Troy Mike announced on April 20th, 2026, that 3 A-10 squadrons, one active duty at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia, and 2 reserve units, including Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, would be extended through 2030 to preserve combat power, while the Defense Industrial Base ramps up production of newer aircraft. By then, A-10s had already been spotted carrying kill markings of Iranian-made Shahed drones on their fuselages, hurriedly modified to fire the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System 2 laser-guided rocket. The same airframe designed to kill Soviet tanks in 1972 was now intercepting one-way attack drones in 2026. According to defense reporting, the so-called A-11 concept being studied internally would marry the Warthog's titanium bathtub, redundant systems, and gun-centric design with modern open architecture avionics, networked sensors, and compatibility with collaborative combat aircraft drones. Whether it ever flies remains an open question. What is no longer in question is that the close air support mission the Air Force tried to bury for half a century is the mission American forces still need most when the shooting starts. The story of the A-10 and the rumored A-11 that may follow it is ultimately a story about institutions arguing with reality. The Air Force wanted a future of stealth, speed, and standoff weapons. The actual wars America has fought for the past 50 years kept demanding loiter time, redundancy, and a pilot willing to fly low enough to see what was happening on the ground. Every time the Warthog was supposed to die, a new war reminded the Pentagon why it could not. Whether the A-11 ever leaves the concept stage or quietly disappears into the budget, the lesson it represents is already written into the airframe it would replace. Build for the war. You are actually fighting, not the war you wish you were. Thanks for watching MisfireX. If this story changed how you see the Warthog, hit subscribe. The next investigation is already in the works.